It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone, and thanks to Kusha Navadar for filling in last week, very capably, as he does. I saw two of the most racist things I've ever seen people display in front of their houses in a town upstate. I won't name the town because I don't want it to get a reputation. I know it's a politically diverse place, so I don't want to make it seem like it's Racistville and start something like that. It's just what I saw in front of two individual homes, not on the same block or anything even, but in two different areas of the same town. One of them was flying a flag outside the home that was a mashup of the American flag and the Confederate flag. It had the American flag stars in the upper left-hand corner, like a regular American flag, and the hint of the American flag stripes, but the rest of it was the Confederate battle flag, that blue X with the stars inside on a red background. Now, I wasn't in upstate Alabama or upstate Mississippi. I was in upstate New York. The other display on someone else's lawn included a Trump sign and a lawn ornament. The ornament wasn't a pink flamingo or whatever some other stereotypical lawn ornament might be. It was a cockroach wearing a sombrero, and it was placed right near the Trump sign. So anybody can support Trump or any other politician that they like, but it came in this case with that lawn ornament. I don't even want to characterize it again out loud. You heard me say what it is. I'm sure you get the idea. So for those of you who haven't left Brooklyn recently, or Jersey City, or Yonkers, or Huntington, or wherever you are down here, those are things you might encounter as you travel just a little further in the 2026 United States. And then I came home to Upper Manhattan, and what did I find? A video that's now making the rounds online and on local TV news, just a few blocks from my building. A masked ICE agent pepper sprayed a woman who was holding up her phone recording the agent's activities. I saw it in a video of her incident that's making the rounds now, as I say. Channel 2 later interviewed the woman, identified as 72-year-old Linda Wolf, who told them she saw a tow truck getting ready to remove an ICE vehicle that was disabled.
I said to the tow truck driver, you should be ashamed of yourself working for ICE. And he got crazy. The ICE guys came over and they just maced me.
Channel 2 also had this very short clip from right after the incident. You'll hear the woman complain to the ICE agent about what he had done and his response.
You just maced me.
I'm going to do it again.
You just maced me, and I'm going to do it again, all while wearing a mask. Channel 2 reports the woman, Ms. Wolf, is considering legal action. AM New York reports it's illegal in New York State for the agent to even be masked while representing the government. AM New York also reports on a larger context. They say borders are Tom Homan's threatened surge of ICE detentions in New York may have now begun. The paper cites other ICE sightings in various boroughs and another incident at a hospital emergency room in Lower Manhattan, the New York Presbyterian Lower Manhattan Hospital on Gold Street, where they report masked ICE agents were seen detaining a man who was in the ER over the weekend. So upstate, we had the racist expressions of two private citizens. Back in Manhattan, I saw on video, but right at the park entrance, a few blocks from my building, a place where almost everyone in Inwood goes on one day or another, an official of the United States government pepper spray a woman trying to record him and him promising to do it again. Of course, I should say, to be fair, we just saw the little video clips that have been making the round and not the full context of whatever else was going on there, but I described what I saw and what's going around. Later in the show, we'll talk specifically about that incident and more broadly the reported surge of ICE agents in the city and the gathering protests against them. Will this pepper spray incident and the one at the hospital be the beginning of New York being the next Minneapolis? We'll see. That's coming up. Now, about that war in the Middle East. The on again, off again, on again, off again, on again, off again, biggest military campaign since World War II is off again today, and less reported, but just essential to the overall situation. A deal Donald Trump says was on for Hamas to disarm and Israel to leave Gaza, just announced it last week. Deal that he says was on for Hamas to disarm and Israel to leave Gaza now appears to be not on. The bigger picture, Trump's quagmire for the U.S. continues with no apparent way out. The even bigger picture, according to our guest, who's about to join us, the new Middle East that's emerging from this war looks a lot like the old Middle East that Trump and Israel and some of the Gulf states have been trying to create since 2023. And of course, a Middle East that looks the same as before means more war, which means the deaths, the wounds, the displacements of so many more people, overwhelmingly Arab and Iranian deaths in these last 3 years, 70,000 plus in Gaza, the generally reported death toll there, but also the estimated 1,200 Israelis killed in the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack, of course, more than 4,000 Lebanese people killed in Israel's attacks there this year, according to the Lebanese government. Iran says 3,000 of its people this year in the U.S.-Israeli strikes, plus the estimated 18 U.S. service members. Each party has also suffered so many injuries. You know, the injuries are always less reported than the deaths. The Pentagon recently acknowledged more than 600 U.S. service members wounded. Did that stat even make it to your news feeds? And yet all sides go on like this. With us now is F. Gregory Gause III, Professor Emeritus at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University and Associate Fellow at the Middle East Institute. He has written 3 books about the Middle East. His new article in Foreign Affairs magazine, which drew our attention, is called The New Old Middle East. The New Old Middle East. Professor Gause, thanks for joining us. Welcome to WNYC.
It's my pleasure.
We'll talk about the news of the weekend and your bigger picture take. First, there was all this reporting last week that with the stalemate over the Strait of Hormuz showing no signs of resolution, Trump might actually mean it this time. I saw multiple networks say some version of Trump might actually mean it this time when he said the U.S. would start attacking Iran in a major way again. But then over the weekend, he said this.
We had an attack that would be the biggest attack since World War II. And it would have been disastrous for them. And they didn't want us to do it. And frankly, Saudi Arabia didn't want it either. They thought that a deal is imminent.
Saudi Arabia thought that a deal is imminent. How many times have we heard the deal is imminent or a deal? Professor Gause, what do you make of the latest threat and withdrawal of the threat? We have seen some version of this so many times now.
It's certainly not new. The president, the way I look at President Trump's conduct of this conflict is that every day is an improvisation. And he likes to be the center of attention. There's no question about that. And he likes to be inconsistent. We know that his bargaining style is to try to keep the other side off balance by not being predictable. But in this context, I think not being predictable has really lowered his credibility. I think the Iranians are basically unimpressed with these big threats of wiping out their infrastructure and all this kind of thing, the biggest attack since World War II. I just don't think that people believe it. And most importantly, I don't think that his adversary, Iran, believes it. And I don't think anybody believes the president when he says that the parameters of a deal, I think he said the perimeters of a deal are apparent. The Saudis are not mediating this conflict. They wouldn't know if some kind of deal is imminent. What I think the Saudis feared is that if there were a major American attack on Iran, the Iranians would respond as they have this entire war. with attacks on Saudi Arabia, on the smaller Gulf states, on the energy infrastructure. We've seen that their attacks have now extended to Jordan and even to Egypt, to energy ports in Egypt, where ships have been set on fire by drones that the Iranians don't claim, but who else would be launching these drones but Iran or some of its proxies?
Before we go on to the potential Israel-Hamas deal, or at least it's a U.S.-Hamas deal that Trump claims exists. I'm not even sure how much Israel was included. We'll get to that. I wonder if it gets reported enough how much economic suffering the people of Iran are experiencing from their government's end of the Strait of Hormuz stalemate. We hear a lot about this country, gasoline and other downstream oil-related prices in the U.S. and the political pressure that puts on Trump with midterms. But what's the Iran version of that, to the extent that you as an expert in the region know?
Well, Brian, you mentioned that I think that the most important consequence for Iranians is that thousands of them have died as a result of this war. The other important consequence is that this government, which is running Iran, demonstrated that it doesn't care if thousands of Iranians die, because this government killed thousands of Iranians when they took to the streets in December and January to protest against this government, against the economic failures of the Iranian government, against its dictatorial practices and its social limitations. And so the United States is imposing serious economic consequences on Iran through the blockade. There's no question about that. I think the difference is that this Iranian government is willing to have its population absorb much, much more economic pain than the Trump administration, or frankly, any American government, any democratically elected government, would be willing to impose on its own population to win a foreign policy confrontation.
Listener writes, and listeners, your comments and questions are welcome for Professor Gauss. 212-433 WNYC 212-433-9692 on news of the last few days, or his new Bigger Picture article in Foreign Affairs magazine, which we'll get to, called The New Old Middle East. 212-433 WNYC call or text 212-433-9692. One text that came in already on Trump says he is consistent. He consistently declares progress on talks and rescinds his threats right before the markets open Monday morning. I think that's a fairly accurate statement of fact. On what you just described about Iran being willing to allow its people to experience such suffering, often I think it's fair to say that more authoritarian governments are more willing to endure pain and allow their people to experience pain than democracies, because they don't stand to have their parties lose power in elections. But then that also, in a sense, gives them more bargaining power in the standoff because they're not as accountable. Do you think anything like that is happening in this case?
Well, we certainly know that the Iranians were willing to come to the table back in April, in June, the previous ceasefires that have been broken, and not exclusively by the United States. The Iranians pushed against that June ceasefire and shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. So I do think that that's an indicator that at least some elements of the Iranian government understand that the economic pain that they are inflicting indirectly on their people through continuing this confrontation with the United States, it could be dangerous down the line. I don't want to predict that we'll see a replay of the countrywide protests in December and January, but that has to be in the minds of the leadership, and I'm sure that if they could get a deal from President Trump that allowed the Iranians to sustain their control over the strait, which is really the key element here, and in effect set up a toll booth in the strait, they would be very happy to to agree to extended ceasefire as long as they still controlled the strait and the United States lifted the naval blockade.
And you mentioned the protests from January. I didn't even include the deaths during those in the numbers that I gave from since officially the war started in late February, right? That's, depending on which human rights organization you believe, 7,000 or more Iranians killed by the government during those protests. Given that, I don't know if you have a number that you cite as the most reliable, but given that amount of slaughter, do you think it's plausible to think that that the people of Iran may try it again anytime soon?
So what we've seen in the Iranian history, recent history since 2009, is that there have been a kind of motivating events that can bring millions of Iranians into the streets to protest their government. In 2009, it was a stolen election, if you will, a fabricated election that brought Mahmoud Ahmadinejad back into a second term as Iran's president. Kind of ironic that there was these reports that the Israelis thought that they could put Ahmadinejad back in power in Tehran at the beginning of this war. There were countrywide protests on economic issues before COVID, and then the Women, Bread, and Freedom protests kind of at the end of COVID, 22, 23, brought, if not millions, hundreds of thousands of Iranians into the streets to protest against the government. And then these protests largely kicked off by economic issues, by the devaluation of the Iranian currency, which of course raises prices for everything that's imported, that occurred December of 25 and January of this year. So despite the fact that in each of these cases, the Iranian government has been brutal in putting down these protests, Iranians will take to the streets again. Now, will they take to the streets so soon after both the brutality of the last reaction against protests combined with the kind of rally round the flag sentiments that get generated in any country that's under attack from foreigners? Who can predict? I wouldn't expect to see Iranians in the streets immediately after a ceasefire, but who knows a year from now what the situation will be domestically. But what we certainly know is that Iranians are not afraid to take to the streets.
On this fact of Iran attacking Gulf states as part of its exertion of power in this war right now, listener asks in a text, explain why Iran doesn't target Israel.
So it has targeted Israel a number of times, both in the lead up to this current conflict. You might recall that the Gaza war set off an escalation between Israel and Iran. The Israelis killed a lot of Iranians in an attack on Damascus. This was back when the Assad regime was still in power and was a close ally of Iran. And the Iranians, on a couple of occasions, have attacked Israel, and Israel has attacked Iran directly before February of 2026. So, but it is interesting, I think, that in this particular war that began at the end of February, the joint American-Israeli attacks, I think the Iranians decided, and this is I don't have any direct evidence of this, but this is kind of me interpreting their behavior. They didn't strike back at Israel as much because what they were trying to do is make the world, the United States and the world, feel the effects of this war. And the way you do that is hitting the energy infrastructure of the Gulf states. Because that, I believe the Iranians thought, would spread the pain, to such an extent that there would be pressure both domestically in the U.S. and internationally to end the conflict. And what the Iranians discovered, and this is one of, I think, the most enduring changes that will come from this war, is that they can close the Strait of Hormuz and attack the energy infrastructure of their neighbors with what they've come to believe is an acceptable cost to them. And that's the new thing here, because before this war, before this phase of the regional war that began in February, I think the Iranians believed, and most observers believed, that American deterrence against Iranian attacks on the Gulf states was a strong support for the small Gulf states' safety, for Saudi Arabia's safety, and that the Iranians wouldn't dare to close the Strait of Hormuz, because not only would the U.S. react, but the whole world would react. And I think that they've found that they have a lever now that they can use at a cost that, at least to them so far, they think is acceptable.
We'll continue in a minute with Gregory Gause from Texas A&M and the Middle East Institute, and his new article in Foreign Affairs magazine called The New Old Middle East. We'll get to what Trump announced as a kind of, I don't want to say done deal, because I don't think he quite said that, but as a deal anyway, which now doesn't look that much like a deal. We'll get Professor Gause's take on the deal Trump said he had for Hamas to disarm and Israeli troops to leave Gaza. That would be such a big thing if both of those things were real. But we'll talk about that and get his take, because that's still developing, and talk about the bigger themes in his article, The New Old Middle East. And more of you with him at 212-433-WNYC. Call or text. Brian Lehrer on WNYC as we continue with F. Gregory Gause III from Texas A&M University and the Middle East Institute, and with his new article in Foreign Affairs magazine called The New Old Middle East. The deal that Trump said he had, without providing details, for Hamas to disarm, a perennial demand by Israel, of course, and for Israeli troops to leave Gaza, something, of course, that Palestinians want. But as those parties go public with their reactions, Professor, it looks like there are still major disagreements about what the framework for such a deal even means. What looks to be real or not real in that announcement by Trump of some kind of breakthrough?
I think that on the Hamas, Gaza and Israel front, the issue's always been sequencing. The Israelis, I don't think even the Netanyahu government, or at least elements of it, want to permanently militarily occupy Gaza. That's a hard job. But they're not going to leave until they're confident that Hamas is completely disarmed. Likewise, Hamas basically says, we're not going to lay down our arms until the Israelis leave. And there is this element that in the original ceasefire, back in 2025, that the Trump administration was able to negotiate with the kind of the end of the Biden administration and the beginning of the Trump administration. There was actually some interesting cooperation between officials of the two to negotiate that ceasefire. The plan called for the establishment of an international security force that would enter into Gaza to provide, if you will, kind of basic police functions. There's been talk about that, but I don't see it organized. I don't see it on the ground. And also another element of that plan was the establishment of a Palestinian, if you will, a technocratic governance structure for Gaza. That Hamas would turn over kind of the administration of and the Israelis, who occupy 70% of Gaza now, would turn over the administration of Gaza to this technocratic Palestinian, if you will, cabinet that would that would govern and administer Gaza. A number of people, a number of Palestinians have been appointed to that cabinet, but they haven't been allowed to take up their positions in Gaza because the Israelis won't let them, because Hamas won't disarm. And so I'm not sure what President Trump sees as having changed in this in this standoff that would lead to the final implementation of all of these points that were agreed to last year. There are some indications that Hamas, once again said that they would be willing to turn over their arms, or at least their heavy arms, but under a number of conditions, including Israeli withdrawal. And I don't see any prospect that the Israelis would buy into that.
I'm glad you took this all the way past the Israeli withdrawal and the Hamas disarmament to the government that would come after. Because here's Trump on that supposed agreement, on this particular part of what would come next. This is Trump late last week, as excerpted here by ABC News.
It will be responsible for recruiting and training a new government that will be made up of Palestinians along with highly qualified experts from all around the world.
So that's what you were describing as a technocratic government, right?
Yes.
And you don't see a prospect of that being able to take hold? Because if they're going to move on from the current situation, Israeli troops, Hamas continuing to develop arms. I saw a report on one streaming channel last night that said Hamas doesn't even need to import arms. Hamas built over the years an infrastructure for manufacturing arms. What they imported over time was parts to develop whatever machinery it is that makes weapons. But they don't need weapons from outside, and that's why they're not disarmed, even with these 3 years of Israeli concerted military action. I'm curious if you have a take on that, but also the idea of this potential government and how to even get there.
Sure. I think that the one of the key problems here is that the Israelis are unwilling to bring the Palestinian Authority into the structure for the governance of Gaza. And, there's all sorts of criticisms that you can level at the Palestinian Authority in terms of its corruption, in terms of its inability to protect Palestinians in the West Bank from the violence of Israeli settlers. But the Palestinian Authority is the only internationally recognized body for Palestinian governance and self-determination. And the Netanyahu government is adamant that it will not allow the Palestinian Authority to have a role in Gaza. If that were not the case, if the Netanyahu government were willing to support a role of the Palestinian Authority, I think it would be much easier to get international parties to participate in the governance of Gaza after an Israeli withdrawal and a Hamas disarmament. And so I think that's a necessary element to keep in mind as one considers what's next in Gaza, if anything is going to change there. On the issue of Hamas armaments, I'm no expert on the military side of things. I would assume, and this is just kind of an amateur informed, not an expert informed opinion, that what Hamas has is plenty of firepower to be disruptive. Maybe it doesn't have the kind of firepower that allowed it to launch missiles into Israel, to plan the October 7th attacks. But it will have plenty of, unless it voluntarily disarms, it will have plenty of firepower to be disruptive of any kind of governance structure that comes into Hamas afterwards, and to be disruptive of the Israeli military occupation.
And maybe not only of the Israelis. Here's a text from a listener who says, didn't Hamas defenestrate these Palestinian moderates as they did in 2005 after the last peace deal? I guess meaning, wouldn't Hamas do that again if some, quote, moderates, that Trump envisions were to take over the governance?
Why Hamas actually was in charge of Gaza is an interesting backstory, right? During the George W. Bush administration, in the aftermath of 9/11, there was an American policy that encouraged democracy, quote unquote, in the Arab world, in the Middle East, on the theory that it was authoritarianism that bred terrorism that led to 9/11. And so one of the elections that was held in the post 9/11 period was in the Palestinian Authority, the West Bank and Gaza, in which Hamas won a majority of the seats in the Palestinian legislature. And this was quite shocking to the Bush administration. Condoleezza Rice reported in her memoirs that she was on her elliptical machine watching television in the morning in her apartment when those election returns were reported, and she said that can't be true, but it was. And so Hamas had this, if you will, elected role in the Palestinian Authority. The Bush administration and the Israeli government kind of pushed the non-Hamas elements in the PA, Fatah, the old centerpiece of the PLO, to kind of move against Hamas. And there was, if you will, something of a military coup planned against the Hamas government that led to fighting and, in effect, Hamas taking over Gaza, where it had always been strong, and Fatah, the PLO remnants, the non-Hamas Palestinian elements, taking over the West Bank. And that's how you got this divided governance structure in the occupied territories. And so Hamas kind of hunkered down in Gaza. Israelis believed, and the Israeli government believed, and many observers believed, that Hamas was kind of becoming less militarily adventurous. They had governance responsibilities. They were trying to maintain themselves in Gaza. And that, of course, was the background to the intelligence failure of October 7th, where the Israelis did not anticipate the Hamas attacks into Israel proper.
Mansour in Jackson Heights, you're on WNYC with Professor Gregory Gause. Hello, Mansour.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Go for it.
I was wondering if President Trump and his advisors are aware of the fact that the most right-wing people in Iran who are opposed to the idea of a diplomatic resolution of the conflict benefit from his threats and propaganda. And they have been doing that from the very beginning of this war. And if President Trump is interested in a peaceful resolution of the conflict, he should really take the kind of positions that help the most moderate elements, because the Iranian regime today is very divided.
What do you think that would be, Mansour, if you have an opinion? What do you think Trump could do that would encourage more moderate elements?
For example, the first step he could take is with respect to given the Iranian economic problems, the sanctions, as well as the frozen assets of Iran, in a very gradual sense, taking one step to release some of the resources of economic resources and sanctions, it will definitely help the vast majority of Iranian people, and this help will benefit the people who want to seek peaceful resolution of the conflict.
Mansour, thank you so much for calling from Jackson Heights. Well, Professor, what do you think?
So I think that this takes us back to the whole theory, the Israeli-American theory behind this war, which was that the decapitation of the Iranian elite, the ruling elite of the Islamic Republican regime at the beginning of this war would open up the possibility of having a new elite, a more, if you will, a more moderate elite, an elite that's not tied to the ideology of the Islamic Republic, come into power. That was always, I think, a very, very long shot. The Israelis were able to decapitate the regime, right? They killed Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader. They killed a whole range of the military and political leadership of the Islamic Republic. But who were they replaced by? Not by moderates, that's for sure. They were replaced by people who had come up through the clerical establishment, like Ali Khamenei's son, Mujtaba Khamenei, who is the current supreme leader, who has not appeared in public, who clearly was injured severely in those attacks at the beginning of the war, and a number of people who came up through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, who clearly believe that they are winning this war, right? They believe that they have found the points of pressure on the United States and on the world economy that give them the upper hand. Hormuz and the very active threat to attack energy infrastructure throughout the region, not just in the Gulf states now, but in Egypt, to attack the American military presence in Jordan. So they think that they have the upper hand, and they're waiting for the United States to basically make concessions. Now, these concessions.
So this goes. Let me jump in, because this goes to the larger theme of your article in Foreign Affairs, the New Old Middle East. You do begin it by saying that in many ways, the war against Iran and the war in Gaza seemed transformative, especially that the U.S.-Israel war against Iran this year seemed genuinely novel. So is there anything left of that before you wind up concluding that same old Middle East?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Iranians have found new levers of power in the region. And, we can indulge in a little hypothetical alternative history here. Let's say this war hadn't started. Ali Khamenei was very old. At some point, he was going to die. The regime in Iran had been damaged by the June 2025 attacks by Israel in the United States. The nuclear infrastructure had been damaged, and the reputation of the regime had been hurt. It seemed to be weaker in the region because of the fall of the Assad regime and the Israeli successes against Iranian allies like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas. And with the popular uprisings of December and January, this was a regime that looked like it might be on the verge of change. And the natural death of the supreme leader, I think, would have created an opening for at least some kind of argument about where Iran was going. But with this war, right, that possibility was preempted. And what we have is an Iranian leadership that is not only committed to the regional project of Iranian power and support for its proxies throughout the region, and its project of anti-Israeli rhetoric and actions, and its anti-American project, but it feels empowered. And so I think that the prospect of kind of the encouragement of moderation within Iranian domestic politics is that much more difficult now than it might have been in this alternative pathway.
And on nuclear weapons, which is the thing that Trump now comes back to as sort of the sole goal of the war, even though at the beginning, he was talking about regime change and the Iranian people taking over their government and other big things. On nuclear weapons, you're right that Iran will now have every incentive to do whatever it can to develop nuclear weapons as the ultimate deterrent to attacks from Israel and the U.S., unquote from your article. Do you believe they were not pursuing nukes previously in that way under the Obama agreement or after Trump ended the Obama agreement during his first term?
So there was every indication that the Iranians were abiding by the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was the Obama nuclear deal. But that doesn't mean that they weren't holding in reserve the possibility of moving toward weaponization. The Iranians seem to be conflicted internally about whether to weaponize or not. They certainly were not openly moving toward weaponization under JCPOA. They seem to have a notion that they could kind of flirt with walking up to the point of weaponization, making people, their neighbors, other international players think that they could easily go that way and thus get some of the deterrent value without having to pay the costs of actually openly weaponizing, violating their obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and opening themselves up as a target. Well, even without doing that, they became a target for Israel and the United States. And given that, it seems to me that the disincentives to weaponize go down. It's a complicated situation, but there's a simple analogy, right? Saddam Hussein didn't weaponize, and he's gone. Kim Jong-un and the North Koreans did weaponize, and they're still there.
I want to ask you a closing question that comes back to something I said in the intro to this segment. I gave some of the casualty stats in the intro. You report in your article that all of the developments of this year have caused millions of people to suffer. And on that, I gave some of the casualty stats in the intro because I think they get too left behind in news coverage compared to the political or military strategies in the situation. But the numbers that I cited, when you add the deaths in Gaza since 2023, plus in Lebanon, in Iran, the attack against Israelis on October 7th, 2023, the U.S. service members who have died, and some people in the Gulf states, those numbers added up to the tens of thousands, which is bad enough. Why do you say millions?
Well, in Lebanon, when the Israelis reinvaded southern Lebanon, some estimates were that as many as 1 million Lebanese were dislocated and left their homes. We certainly know that in Iran, the economic consequences of the war were difficult for Iranian society. We know that in the Gulf states themselves, very rich states, there were disruptions of economic life and social life that harmed not only the citizen populations there, but also the very large immigrant worker populations there, some of whom lost their jobs, the jobs that kind of support their families in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, the Philippines, where the countries that have large communities of foreign workers in these rich Gulf states. Israelis suffered, not just those who were killed, obviously, in the Hamas attack, and of course the civilian population in Gaza, the Palestinians in Gaza. Their physical infrastructure has been so severely degraded that they're subject in the winter to difficult living conditions outside in tents or in bombed out buildings, the water supply. The consequences of this war are not simply the deaths, as regrettable as they are, but the disruption of the livelihood of so many people, I would say millions, in the region as a whole.
And unresolved at this point. F. Gregory Gause III is Professor Emeritus at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University and an associate fellow at the Middle East Institute. His new article in Foreign Affairs magazine is called The New Old Middle East. Thank you so much for joining us.
It was my pleasure.